Alright, hey guys, I'm back here with you guys at 12:30 in the morning to go ahead and record another video. This is your tired teacher who apparently is an insomniac because this is the usual time I record. Anyways, so guys, we are down to a new historical period. We finally made it. We're here with period 3. And we're starting things off with the long-term causes of the American Revolution. So, I wanted to start off with this slide with you guys. And we have here a cartoon drawn by Benjamin Franklin in 1754. And the caption reads, "Join or Die." This was printed in the Pennsylvania Gazette. And notice how, it's a snake. A chopped up snake. And here we see at the tail we got South Carolina, then we got North Carolina, then we got Virginia, then we got Maryland, and yeah, I know it looks like an R, guys, it's just a smudge right there, but that's a P for Pennsylvania. We got New Jersey, New York, and notice the head of the snake is New England. So, how do we get here? How do we get to this point where Benjamin Franklin is saying, "Hey colonies, let's join up or together we'll perish"? So there's stuff boiling underneath the surface, and that's what we're going to uncover today. So some of this is going to seem review from colonial history. Granted, some of these things were happening throughout the 1600s and early 1700s. But then some of the other long-term causes will be primarily a 1700s kind of thing. So let's go ahead and go on this journey and check out the long-term causes of the American Revolution. So here we go. Yeah, we can't escape this one, guys. Mercantilism. So mercantilism, remember, we had talked about this last stream. So mercantilism, we believe that there's a limited amount of wealth. It's not infinite. So we gotta pick up the most gold and silver and just straight up cash however we can. And how we're gonna do this is with this system of mercantilism. We are going to set up shop in the New World with our colonies, and our colonies' purpose is to benefit the mother country, so to benefit Great Britain. And essentially, I mean, that's what's going to happen. Because look at this. We got raw materials coming in from the colonies here, going straight to our mother country, Great Britain. Great Britain is turning it around and using those raw materials to create factory finished goods or products, which they are in turn sending, or rather selling, to their colonial markets. So in essence, the colonies are there solely to make money for the mother country. So, how we try to enforce this system is through the Navigation Acts. Now, the Navigation Acts, came around because of King Charles II. And what we got here is that they're trying to limit trade when you think about it. So here's how we limit trade. All goods traded from and to North America are going to have to be on colonial or British ships. No side deals with the French, with Spanish, with the Dutch, none of that. Same with the crews. Crews have to be at least 75% British or colonial. Then you've got your cash crops like tobacco, rice, and your other major money makers like sugar, molasses, and furs. All those things, Great Britain's got exclusive trading rights to all that. So, again, no side deals. And goods traded between colonies and Europe had to be unloaded at British ports. Obviously, probably for some inspection, right? So, essentially, Great Britain wants to try to keep the colonies, straight and narrow with this and not deviate whatsoever, because that would hurt the system, right? That would hurt the mother country with mercantilism. So obviously there's got to be enforcement of this. And where do we have our colonial trade hubs? We learned this with the period 2 videos. Our colonial trade hubs will mainly be in Massachusetts and throughout the rest of New England, as well as New York. But Massachusetts, trade. So leave it up to the Puritans to go ahead and enforce whatever rules they like, but when it comes to enforcing rules on them, they like to sidestep them. And it goes without saying with the Navigation Acts. I mean, come on now, smuggling. There's much smuggling being had in Boston ports in the day. So King Charles II tries to crack the whip on this and tries to get Massachusetts to fall in line. But Massachusetts keeps going around the system. So he's going to go ahead and remove their charter and make it a royal colony now. So he thinks he's got it under control, but, well, there's going to be some more rebellion going on. The colonists are going to do some side deals with Spain, with France, with Holland. Yeah, smuggling is going to still happen. And it's kind of funny because the British at this time are trying to enforce more of the Navigation Acts, but they're kind of their own worst enemies with this because they practice salutary neglect. They look the other way. They're the bad parents who let you do what you want to do. So that's what they did with the 13 colonies. That's what they're doing at this time. It's British absenteeism, otherwise salutary neglect, right? So, and it's all because, well, the colonies are kind of an ocean away, right? I mean, the Atlantic Ocean separates the two areas. So it's not like Great Britain can just pop on in whenever it wants and, check things out. It's going to take a while to send messages from Parliament to the colonies and back. So, yeah, there's some disconnect right there. Plus, Great Britain doesn't exactly have its act together right now either. It's got all kinds of craziness going on with the English Civil War, and again with the Glorious Revolution, where, King James II is pretty much fleeing the country because we've got William and Mary of Orange coming in, instituted by Parliament. So, the colonies are pretty much there to defend for themselves, and that's what they do. They take care of themselves. I mean, each region is going to have their own economy based on, like we were talking about before with colonial America, based on their geography. So, like southern colonies, cash crops. Middle colonies, breadbasket, but yet trade and shipping and small-scale manufacturing and cottage industries. And then New England, trade, fishing, whaling, all that. Lumber, shipbuilding. So, you see, they're going to sustain themselves economically. And there's a lot of economic growth to be had here in the colonies. I mean, the colonies, when we consider Great Britain and the colonies had a lot of money. A lot of, income that they were generating. I mean, they were basically a third of Great Britain's GNP. So essentially the colonies were the big cash cow, the big money maker. And when you compare the GDP of just the colonies and Great Britain, it was the highest in the world by 1775. So yeah, the money is flowing, not necessarily to the colonies directly, but the colonists still see that they have the potential to go ahead and sustain themselves if they want. So, another way they see that they could sustain themselves is because they're setting up their own rules. They've got self-government. They've got colonial legislatures. They've got town halls. So, plus these people here in the colonies, I mean, Great Britain so far hasn't done anything to, like, question them and their motives. So far, we get some happy colonists here. Very loyal. And, you know, well fed, honestly. I mean, breadbaskets doing their jobs, middle colonies. So, we got high life expectancy. And, thanks to the crazy-ass Puritans, high literacy rates in New England. And even in the middle colonies where Pennsylvania and the Quakers are making public education accessible. So, got all that stuff going on for the colonies. And lots of people moving in, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of people wanting a piece of that pie here. So, we have a vast amount of land to, have these people live on. And really, with more people, of course, more self-government. So like we were saying before, with salutary neglect, Great Britain just kind of like turned away to like all this stuff. They kind of ignored it. Or rather, just didn't deal. So, I would kind of describe Great Britain at this time as kind of like those parents where, like, their kids going kind of crazy, like in a restaurant or like at H-E-B or something, or Walmart, and the parents are just like, whatever, and they still talk to their friends. So that's kind of Great Britain at this time. They know shenanigans are going on, but they're not dealing. They're letting it slide. So every now and then we do see the rise in authority, right? But I mean, for the most part, it's more like, here are the rules, we're not really enforcing them. So, there's some sidestepping going on too, though. I mean, with colonial self-rule, we're not just having, like, colonial legislatures that are colony-wide. We're having local government as well. New England is definitely one to have your local town hall meetings in the church. I mean, come on now. They're going to vote on issues that concern their locality. Southern colonies got some sheriffs going on. Because remember, they're more rural, they're more spread out, so you got the sheriff system, kind of upholding the local law. So, speaking of the government structure though, here in the colonies, I mean, this is your hierarchy. You got the British Crown on top, right? And they send royal governors to the colonies, and the governors are basically supposed to act on behalf of the king. So, any sort of policy that's coming from the king or from Parliament goes through the royal governor and disseminates to the colonies. But, and here's the big but here, colonial assemblies could withhold the governor's salary. Because in the colonies, the colonial assemblies got the power to tax. And they have the authority to make local laws. So, you kind of need that relationship going on between royal governor and colonial assembly. But here's another thing. The royal governor could always dissolve the colonial assembly. And they oversee trade. So really what's needed is this happy medium going on to where royal governor will be happy, colonists will be happy. So you can see some bribes going on, some kickbacks. Yeah, money's gonna flow. So, we're going to start to see the weirdest challenge of authority in the most unlikely place. And it's going to be with religion, with the Great Awakening. So, remember, Puritan membership was on the decline, right? I mean, they'd already done the halfway covenant, tried to boost membership for the Puritan church. They were trying to, this time around, have this kind of like new school way of doing Puritanism. So they're not the Puritans of old that we talked about with the foundings in New England and Massachusetts Bay. These guys are a little different. What we got now is more than what's known as the New Lights, okay? This is going to be people like Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield. And they're going to do things a bit different. Instead of being like, hey, we're Puritans, we hate everybody but you, kind of people, these guys are more like, hey, we're Puritans. Come and hear what we got to say. So the Great Awakening is going to target a wide variety of people. African Americans, Native Americans, women are going to get involved. So here are the two influential ministers you guys will hear about. It's going to be Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. Now, they're going to do something a little different at this time. They're going to appeal to like an individual's experience with God instead of like saying, hey, you got to go through church to connect with God. So you see, in a weird sense, what these two ministers are preaching is that fight authority. You're getting a sense of freedom and independence from the Great Awakening. Because remember, these new lights are like, yeah, you can worship with God yourself. You don't need church to help you do it. So again, they are challenging church authority, and people in the colonies are going to take that and run with it. That same ideal, and they're going to apply it to their lives. So, Jonathan Edwards is really most known for his sermon, Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God. And, I mean, this basically is telling everybody they're going to hell, pretty much. But you got to do good works and, express your deep penitence so that God can save you. So really, I mean, he's going to appeal to emotions, which is a totally different thing as well for religion. George Whitefield is also going to say stuff like, God will only save people who openly profess their belief in Jesus. So again, that one-on-one connection with God, you got to keep that going. And both ministers are going to appeal to emotions. Because really, now we're going to see emotionalism become part of Protestant services. The church is really going to be split on this. Your old lights, your old school Puritans, are going to be like, what the hell? We need this church authority to have our connection with God. The new lights are like, nah, we don't need that. There should be a more separation of church and state. So, with political influence, like we said, Great Awakening is going to show people that, hey, we've got a common experience. We are challenging authority of the church, so why can't we challenge authority of our government? And it's just going to instill that whole fight the power kind of feeling. Plus, like I said, it's going to be really weird. Okay, religion is doing that, where they're also hearing that same message is with science and reason and logic, with the Enlightenment, which you guys probably remember is like the exact opposite of religion, right? I mean, the type of ideals that they promote, their inspiration, their background. So Enlightenment philosophers are going to pretty much put this emphasis on like reason, natural rights, and this whole thing. So John Locke, I mean, you guys should be familiar with him from world history. He's going to argue stuff like, people have natural rights, life, liberty, and not the pursuit of happiness. That's Jefferson. But it's going to be property. So, in essence, what he's setting up with his social contract is this. Government and the people have an agreement. The people have agreed to give up certain rights so that the government can, do its job, keep order, and protect their rights that they still retain, their natural rights. So, essentially, agreeing to be governed, right? The consent of the governed. We kind of see that in there. Now, what happens if government is too oppressive and they start taking away those rights? then, according to Locke, people have the right to overthrow such government and replace it. So, again, fighting the power, fighting the system. Baron de Montesquieu here is going to be like, hey, absolute monarchy? No, we shouldn't have that. We should have more of a separation of powers. We're going to see his principles applied more during, the constitutional times, but I mean, the influence is there. We also have other Enlightenment philosophers that will influence us, like Hobbes and Rousseau, who are going to promote these same types of ideals. Now, as we go later on, colonists are going to see more and more that the British government has been violating their social contract with the people. So in essence, by talking about the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening, they do have some stark differences, but we could see the essential similarity there, right? Both movements are going to cause people to question their traditional authority and practice. Again, individual rights, individual freedoms, liberty. You see, that idea is emerging. So, what we also have emerging at this time is going to be our national character. Because now, not only are we sharing that religious experience, not only are we kind of following this whole train of thought from the Enlightenment philosophers, but we too are also establishing a national character through our shared colonial experience. Colonists' motivations for leaving Europe, I mean, think of New England. They left for religious freedom, right? So they have that shared experience. The southern colonies, they left for economic opportunity, so they have that experience. So you see, I mean, the colonial regions are starting to unite as far as like the regional identity. What we don't have yet is a national identity. That's going to emerge later. But colonists here in the 13 colonies are experiencing things so different from the British mainland. I mean, yeah, they're English, right? But a lot of them by this point in time have never been to Great Britain. They have no real concrete connection with the British mainland that their grandparents and great-grandparents had. So there's some disconnect there. They rather identify more with their colonial region. Like, they identify with the Chesapeake. They identify with New England. They identify with Pennsylvania. Like, you see what I mean? So, plus here in the colonies, there are more emphasis on free speech and free press. So we don't have the government cracking down on things like that. I mean, we talked about the John Peter Zenger case last time, and how the colonial courts down here had said, hey, he didn't commit seditious libel. He was publishing the truth, thus establishing that whole freedom of the press. So, I mean, all of this, religious toleration as well, in places like New York, Pennsylvania, I mean, throughout most of the colonies by this point in time, are going to unite the colonists in a unique way. There's also that chance for upward mobility, right? I mean, there is no aristocracy here. There's no nobility. So people have that opportunity to climb up the ranks, improve their circumstances, and become rich, self-made. So that is the colonial experience. We just need one major event to unite us, or at least to get us thinking about uniting. And that major event is going to be the French and Indian War. So, to understand this major event, the French and Indian War, let's go ahead and get some historical context. Now, let's talk about the French colonies. The French colonies, as we could see from this image right here, they're not fighting with the Native Americans. They're actually living in peace and harmony because the French have developed their colonies in such a way that Native Americans and French colonists often intermarry. You have this mutual respect, and they're good trade partners with the French. And that right there is the major difference between French colonies and British colonies, the relations with the native populations. So, plus their motives for what they want to do with their land. Now, the French, colonization isn't really that big of a thing for them. There aren't that many colonists living in New France. It's double the size of, the British colonies, but less people. Now, the British colonies, though, they are interested in settlement and economic opportunity. The French colonies, kind of more motivated by exploiting the resources of the land as the reason why they want to hold on to their colonial holdings. So you've got two different interests right here, going after the same area. And this same area that they try to go after is this area right here along the Ohio River Valley. So we got three rivers converging right here. We've got the Ohio River, we've got the Allegheny River, and we got the Monongahela River. So all three of them converge in this one spot, which, if we're thinking about the United States today, this is going to be modern day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And what the French end up doing to kind of spark the French and Indian War, okay, mind you, disclaimer here, French and Indian War is who we were fighting in this war. The colonists, I mean. They're fighting the French and they're fighting their native allies. So here in the colonies, it's 1754 to 1763. Now in Europe, it's called the 7 Years' War. And again, it's against like France and England, right? Spain gets involved because, well, they do. They do. At this time, I mean, there's this big, like, political, like, triangle going on, pretty much. Like, when Great Britain's at war, they're probably at war with either France or Spain. It always bounces like that. So anyways, I digress. Let's go ahead and see what really caused this war to spark. So, obviously, there's a dispute in land, right? What the French are going to do is they're going to try to claim this land for themselves. And how they do that is by setting up Fort Duquesne. So, this fort is set up here, and the British find out, right? The British find out. So, they are going to send a very young George Washington to go ahead and try to kick the French out. George Washington's maybe about 21, 22 years old at this time, and he's getting his feet wet with military experience. This is his first big show, pretty much. So, here's young George Washington, and he too establishes a fort of his own. Oh my god, this is like the most adorable thing I've ever seen. Oh, it truly lives up to its name. Fort Necessity. It just has your bare necessities there, which is a flag, a wall, and a cabin. Lord. That's Fort Necessity. So, it's like 60 miles away from Fort Duquesne. Is the British fort. Now, George Washington ends up coming across the French on Jumonville, Glen, and what we see here is Washington and his native allies, which in this instance, the Iroquois, would align with the British during the French and Indian War. They're going to attack the French here. And within a couple minutes, we already got 10 Frenchmen dead, 21 wounded, and the French aren't really going to like this. So, a few days later, they're going to attack Washington, and he's going to have to surrender Fort Necessity. I know, guys, I know. It looks like something you build in your backyard. Whatever. It's still a fort. And so, when you surrender something, you have to draw up surrender documents, okay? And unfortunately, the interpreter who is drawing up these documents made the mistake of saying that the British killed French diplomats, not combatants. That's a huge mistake, guys. So, and thus implicating George Washington as a murderer, when in reality, I mean, it was soldiers fighting soldiers. But anyways, George Washington, this dude, he must have 9 lives or something, because I swear, this guy, like, always gets shot at and survives. So, let's go ahead and take a look at his account on what happened in Jumonville, Glen. I fortunately escaped without any wound, for the right wing where I stood was exposed to and received all the enemy's fire, and it was the part where the man was killed and the rest wounded. I heard the bullets whistle, and believe me, there's something charming in the sound. Dude, if you're hearing bullets whistle, that means bullets are flying straight by your head. Like, for real. They are flying right by your head. So, like I said, this guy probably should be dead, but he's not. And so, okay, George Washington, we see you. You're part cat. So that's live number 1 of his 9 lives. Live number 2 happens when the British attack Fort Duquesne. So the next year, General Braddock is going to come on down with 1,500 men to try to take this fort from the French. So, but they're ambushed, and the native allies and French soldiers are going to attack. And you know what? General Braddock and his staff, his entire staff, was killed, except for our boy George Washington. So, live number 2 right there. Now, this defeat was one of many that would happen during this time period. And so the British are going to suffer some major losses, but things are going to turn around for them when we get new Prime Minister William Pitt. William Pitt hates it that the British are, like, losing. So King George III picks him to go ahead and run the British government, and William Pitt is going to open up that checkbook, and he's going to write a whole bunch of checks, pretty much take out a whole bunch of loans. And essentially he puts together a massive army of 50,000 men to go ahead and go over to fight the French. Now we're talking 50,000 men he's going to have to transport across the Atlantic Ocean with their horses and cannons and muskets and food and supplies and, like, everything you can think of. Sailing across that Atlantic Ocean. This is going to be hella expensive, and it's going to come back. And Great Britain's going to go practically broke over this war. So, guess who's going to have to pay for this later? Yeah, we're looking at you, colonies. You rolling in the money. But anyways, while this is going on, here at the Albany Conference, we've brought together representatives from Great Britain, representatives amongst the colonial, 13 colonies, and representatives amongst the Native American tribes, which are part of the Iroquois Confederation. So, here at the Albany Conference, this is when Benjamin Franklin draws up the plans for the Albany Plan of Union. And he's essentially telling the colonies, hey guys, why don't we come together and unite for a common defense? Because we're fighting both the French and the Indians. Why don't we just come together? Why don't we join? Or we'll die. See where we're getting with this? So, at first, the Iroquois are going to refuse. They're going to say, yeah, we're neutral. The colonies are going to shoot down Benjamin Franklin's Albany Plan of Union. But what's going to end up happening is that, in essence, the idea is still thrown out there. You know, the colonies are still kind of thinking about this, and they rejected the idea because they felt that it didn't give the individual colonies enough independence. But after this war, we're going to take that same notion and we're going to start looking at it a bit differently. Because up until this point, the colonists are still very happy with the British. But after this war, that's when things are going to start changing. So, I don't have much military history for you guys today, so I'm going to throw in one battle. AP doesn't really like going over military history, but anyways, let's go ahead and talk about the turning point of the French and Indian War, which was the Battle of Quebec. So, this is who we have here. We got General Wolfe, which has such an awesome name, General Wolfe, and we got General Montcalm for the French. So you see the battle lines drawn right there. Quebec is a big city in New France at this time. And so Wolfe is bringing 1,400 men with him. Montcalm has 4,000 to defend with. So the British are going to suffer heavy casualties in this battle. 58 were killed, but 600 are wounded. On the French side, you've got a combined 644 men either killed or wounded. So even the two generals, Wolfe and Montcalm, are dead in this battle. They're killed. So, because of the sheer numbers, the British end up victorious. Now, there's a certain thing I want to bring up about like the attitudes towards war during this time. So, you see this very famous painting by Benjamin West, which is portraying the death of General Wolfe. Now, mind you guys, musket balls are freaking huge. These things are like about the size of like a nickel. I mean, there's some big musket balls. And this guy's shot. He is going to be like just gushing out blood. But notice there is not a drop on his shirt. You don't see it anywhere. Not even in like, you know, the cloth that they're holding up to this dude's chest. Nothing. This death looks beautiful. Right? This is such a beautiful image. But yet, war as we know it is not beautiful. It's not that serene and peaceful. This is still the time period in history where people are viewing war as romantic and heroic and honorable. We're going to see a shift in the attitudes of war as we go on through this course. So, that's why we're looking at this painting now from Benjamin West. When we talk about the American Revolution, you know, the next couple of lectures that we're doing on here, we're going to see images portraying the American Revolution, and you'll notice a stark contrast. It's going to get darker. It's going to get grittier. It's going to get nastier. More chaotic looking. And when we move on with this course and we start to see photographs, we'll start to see the real truth of war. So just keep that in the back burner, guys, because there are some notions and ideals that will change throughout American history. So let's go ahead and end this war, guys, with the Treaty of Paris. Here's a disclaimer, guys. Most of the important treaties that you got to know for APUSH history, they're going to be named Treaty of Paris or Treaty of Versailles. There's a few others thrown out there, like the Treaty of Ghent, Adams-Onis Treaty, you know, Picquigny's Treaty, but there's a few thrown out there, all right, that are different. But usually, Treaty of Paris, we're going to have several of them. So this Treaty of Paris that we're talking about today is the Treaty of Paris in 1763. This is the one that officially ends the French and Indian War. Now, New France is pretty much going to go poof. France doesn't control it anymore. It's going to be controlled by the British and by the Spanish. Because remember, they're involved, but on the British side. So, this is how we're going to see things play out. Let me get the map up here. Now, you see, before the war, all of this pinkish area right here, that was New France. But after the war, you see how it's divided. This is now Spanish territory, with the exception of the Oregon country. basically Spanish territory, right? And yeah, Florida even switches hands temporarily. This is going to be English territory now. So this is what we get out of this. Colonists see this as like, dude, we got way more land now. We can move out there. So to colonists, they're like, yeah, they are super pumped. They're united. They're like, dude, we fought a war and we won. Like, they feel so accomplished with the French and Indian War that, you know, the French threat is removed. They're like, dude, they're at an all-time high right now. But this relationship that they've got going with Great Britain is going to start to be, we're going to start to see the cracks. All right? It's going to start crumbling. Now, taxes are going to be imposed on the colonists to pay for this war. We'll go more in depth over those taxes with our next lecture. But one thing that happens immediately after the war is going to be Pontiac's rebellion. And this right here is going to be the thing that's going to convince the British Crown that maybe moving into that territory isn't such a good idea. So, Chief Pontiac, right here, he's with the Ottawa, and he's going to form a confederacy with various tribes in the area because they hate it that the British are moving into their turf. There's going to be some attacks. There's going to be some fighting breaking out. And even when the British violate, you know, terms of their treaty with Chief Pontiac, Pontiac and his confederacy are going to attack forts along this area. So, the British are going to respond in kind with fighting of their own in Pennsylvania to try to take back the forts that were seized by Pontiac. So, in the end, though, Pontiac and his confederacy will end up surrendering, but the damage is done. Because Great Britain's like, dude, this isn't worth it. We're going to constantly have to defend the colonists if they move out to this area. So what are they going to do? They actually lay down the law as parents. They say, hey, for your own protection, colonists, you cannot cross the Appalachians right here. This line right here that we see. You can't cross it. So, that is going to be a major issue to the frontier farmers. I mean, those guys were the ones doing the heavy lifting, fighting this war. And they feel that they are limited now, that they can't enjoy the fruits of their labor. So, the cracks are starting to show up. Proclamation of 1763 gets people to start questioning Great Britain and their motives and how they're protecting their rights. So you see, the seeds of the revolution have already been cast. We just need more immediate things to happen that are going to get the ball rolling. So in essence, guys, what we've talked about today was mercantilism and the Navigation Acts, the Enlightenment ideals, the Great Awakening, population explosion and experiences in colonial self-rule, the French and Indian War, and our more immediate causes of restrictive laws passed by the British will be for next time, guys. That's going to get the ball rolling, and, you know, a few years later, we're going to be fighting a war against Great Britain for our independence. So, hope you guys enjoyed this stream. There we go. That's our long-term causes of the American Revolution with our spark, the French and Indian War. So, join me next time. We talk about those pesky acts like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Tea Act, the Townsend Acts, and duties, right? So, all right. Catch you later, guys. Bye.